The community hall had always been a calm, familiar place where small gatherings and simple celebrations took place, and that evening was no different. Soft lights hung from the ceiling, casting a warm glow across the wooden floor. People moved around in small groups, talking quietly, laughing softly, and enjoying the easy atmosphere. It was the kind of event where nothing dramatic was expected to happen. Everyone knew everyone, or at least recognized each face enough to offer a smile. The mood was peaceful, relaxed, almost predictable. Near the corner of the hall stood an old, upright piano. It wasn't polished like those grand instruments seen on stages, and its keys were slightly worn from years of use. Still, it carried a presence, as if it waited patiently for someone to touch it again. But no one had gone near it the entire evening. People glanced at it now and then, but quickly returned to their conversations. Music just didn't seem to be on anyone's mind. Among the group was a young man who had arrived quietly, greeting a few people and then finding a seat near the edge of the room. He wasn't someone who drew attention. In fact, most people barely noticed him unless they looked directly at him. He had a gentle way of moving, almost as if he didn't want to disturb anyone. He listened more than he spoke, offering small nods and polite smiles when others talked to him. Those who knew him understood that he wasn't shy, he just didn't feel the need to be loud. The host of the gathering, an older man with friendly eyes and a warm voice, moved around the room greeting guests. At one point, he stood near the center and clapped his hands lightly to get everyone's attention. The chatter slowly faded, and people looked toward him. He smiled and said, "It feels a little too quiet tonight, doesn't it? We need something to brighten the room a bit." He glanced around as if searching for an idea, and then his eyes landed on the piano. "Does anyone here know how to play? Even a little something would be nice. Doesn't have to be anything fancy, just something to fill the room." A few people looked at each other, some shrugged, and others chuckled. No one seemed ready to volunteer. The piano had that effect sometimes it could make people nervous. Then, from one of the tables, someone pointed toward the young man in the corner. "He plays, doesn't he?" the person said casually, not expecting much. The young man lifted his head slightly, surprised to hear himself mentioned. He opened his mouth to speak, but hesitated. He wasn't used to being called out. The host turned toward him with a friendly expression. "Oh, you play piano? Would you like to share something with us? Just a short piece?" The young man felt the weight of several eyes turning toward him. He rubbed his hands together, thinking he didn't want to disappoint anyone, but he also didn't want to seem rude by refusing. After a moment, he gave a small nod. "I can play something simple," he said quietly. The host brightened. "Wonderful. Only if you're comfortable, of course. No pressure. Just whatever you feel like." A few people clapped lightly, more out of encouragement than excitement. The young man stood slowly, straightening his shirt as if preparing himself. He could hear a soft wave of whispers, harmless chatter, the kind of conversation that usually followed a moment like this. He made his way toward the piano. The movement seemed to shift the atmosphere slightly. It wasn't dramatic, but people began paying attention in a quiet way. Some turned their chairs, others leaned forward. Even those who didn't know him seemed curious. He reached the piano and placed one hand on the top of it, almost as if greeting an old friend. Then he pulled out the bench, sat down, and took a moment to settle. His feet rested lightly on the ground. His posture was straight but relaxed. He stared at the keys in front of him, breathing in slowly. Behind him, the hall remained filled with soft sounds, low conversations, plates being moved on tables, a few distant laughs. Nothing tense. Nothing expectant. Most people assumed he would play one of those basic songs that nearly everyone learned when they were young. A simple melody, something short, sweet, and forgettable. But the young man's gaze softened as he looked at the keys. His fingers hovered above them, not pressing yet, simply waiting. He didn't feel the pressure of an audience. Instead, he felt a strange calmness. He had played music for years, but always in private, always for himself. He never thought his playing would matter to anyone else. And even now, he wasn't trying to impress. He just wanted to honor the request. He pressed the first key. A gentle note echoed through the room, soft but clear. Then another followed, and another. The melody began to take shape, Not clumsy, but smooth and controlled. It wasn't loud enough to break conversations at first, but it was enough to make a few people glance toward him and raise their eyebrows. The young man continued playing, letting the notes guide his fingers. He wasn't thinking about the crowd. He wasn't thinking about nerves. He was simply playing the way he always played when he was alone, allowing the music to flow out naturally. One by one, the conversations in the room began to fade. People who had been deep in discussion suddenly noticed the unexpected beauty rising from the piano. They turned their heads, surprised. Some stopped mid-sentence. Others placed their drinks down slowly. What they heard was not the kind of casual tune they had expected. It was something different, smooth, steady, expressive. A few people exchanged looks as if asking silently, was this the same quiet young man they thought they knew? The host stood nearby, hands loosely clasped in front of him, and watched with interest. The music seemed to transform the space around him. The air felt lighter, calmer, as if the piano itself had been waiting for the right moment to speak. As the young man played, he began to forget where he was. The room faded from his awareness, replaced by the familiar comfort of the piano keys under his fingertips. His movements became more confident, the music smoother. He didn't rush. He didn't force anything. The melody unfolded naturally, like a story being told. More people turned their chairs. Someone near the back gently nudged a friend and whispered something with amazement. A child who had been fidgeting earlier sat still, eyes fixed on the piano. Even the kitchen staff paused near the doorway, listening. The young man remained focused, letting the rhythm guide him. He didn't smile. He didn't look around. He simply allowed the music to fill the hall, and slowly, the atmosphere transformed. What had started as a casual evening filled with light chatter is now a room pulled together by the unexpected sound of the piano. The young man, who had come in quietly and hoped to blend into the background, now held everyone's attention without even trying. The piece he played wasn't one that anyone instantly recognized. It wasn't one of those common tunes played at gatherings, but something about it felt emotional, gentle, yet strong in a way that quietly held the room still. People paid attention to how his fingers moved smooth and steady, as if he had done this thousands of times. No one had imagined someone so quiet had such skill. It was surprising, but in a good way. The kind of surprise that made people smile softly to themselves. The young man didn't see the reactions around him, but he felt something changing in the room. It wasn't pressure or nervousness, it was warmth. A sense that the music was doing something beyond the notes themselves. The host stepped slightly closer, not wanting to disturb the performance, but wanting to witness it more closely. His eyes softened with appreciation. He had only asked for something simple to lighten the mood, yet what he received was far more meaningful. As the melody continued, a few people slowly put away their phones and stopped checking messages. The music had a way of pulling them into the moment. It made them pause, listen, and forget whatever had been on their minds before. What made the moment special wasn't just the music hit, was the unexpected nature of it. No one had prepared for this. No one had imagined that a simple request would lead to something so captivating. The young man kept playing, letting the melody expand and settle gracefully into the space. His fingers moved effortlessly, and the piano responded with warm, rich tones. He didn't try to draw attention. He didn't need to. The music spoke for itself, and slowly, something beautiful happened. The room grew silent, not because anyone demanded it, but because everyone wanted to listen. It was the kind of silence that came from genuine appreciation. The kind that formed naturally when people were truly moved in that moment. The young man wasn't just a quiet guest sitting at the edge of the room. He was someone who had brought everyone together without a single word. And the night, which had begun like any other gathering, was already becoming unforgettable. The first notes had already changed the mood of the room. But as the young man continued to play, something deeper began to happen. People who had only meant to listen for a moment found themselves slowly turning their bodies toward the piano, as if pulled by an unseen force. The soft conversations that had filled the room earlier faded almost completely, replaced by the warm, steady flow of music that seemed to settle into every corner of the hall. The young man did not look up. His focus remained on the piano keys, but his movements changed in small, meaningful ways. His shoulders relaxed a little more. His hands glided with a softer confidence. His back straightened, not stiffly, but naturally, as though he had forgotten where he was and slipped into a familiar world where only the music mattered. The people around him began to sense it too. The melody he played wasn't loud, yet it carried a quiet strength, the kind that didn't need force to be felt. A few people exchanged surprised glances, quietly mouthing things like, "I didn't know he could play like that," though they were careful not to speak too loudly. Afraid to interrupt the moment, a couple who had been sitting near the entrance moved their chairs closer, trying to hear more clearly. A small group that had been laughing earlier now sat completely still. Even the children, usually full of energy and impatience at events like this, seemed strangely calm. One young girl sat cross-legged on the floor, her eyes fixed on the pianist as though she didn't want to blink and miss anything, in the kitchen doorway. Two staff members paused for a moment, leaning slightly forward to listen. One whispered, "He's really good," and the other nodded silently. Surprised, the young man's fingers moved faster now, though not in a showy way. The notes formed patterns that felt like waves, rising gently, falling softly, then rising again with a new kind of tenderness. Each sound carried a small emotion, subtle but real. The music was not the kind meant for applause or praise. It was the kind that made people feel without knowing exactly why. A man standing near the middle of the room closed his eyes for a moment, letting the sound wash over him. He had come to the event expecting nothing more than a simple evening. But now he felt something tug at his heart, something warm and strangely nostalgic. He couldn't explain it, but he didn't need to. The music did not require explanations. The host of the gathering stood close enough to see the young man's expression. He noticed that the young man didn't look nervous anymore. Instead, he looked peaceful, as though he had finally found a place where he could breathe freely. It made the host smile softly. He had asked for something simple, but what he received was far beyond what he had imagined. As the melody carried on, the room slowly transformed. The warm lights above seemed to glow a little softer. The quiet rustle of clothes, the shifting of chairs, the faint sound of footsteps, all of it faded into the background until only the music remained. People who had been scrolling through their phones earlier put them down, not because someone asked them to, but because they didn't want to break the spell. A few held their hands together in their laps, their expressions gentle and thoughtful. Some leaned forward with both elbows on their knees, eyes fixed on the pianist as if they were watching a moment that might never happen again. The young man played on, unaware of the impact he was making. He let his hands move from the lower keys to the higher ones, blending soft tones with slightly sharper ones that carried a quiet ache. The music felt like a story without words, one filled with calm moments, sad pauses and hopeful rises. A woman sitting at the front felt a small lump form in her throat. She wasn't sure why. Maybe it was the emotion hidden in the notes. Or maybe it was the unexpected beauty of seeing someone so quiet reveal such depth with something as simple as a piano. She brushed a fingertip under her eye, surprised at her own reaction. A young boy sitting beside his father leaned closer and whispered, "Did he learn this himself?" The father didn't have an answer, so he simply placed a gentle hand on the boy's head and continued listening. Another man, who had been standing near the back, took out his phone silently and began recording, careful not to disturb the performance. He wanted to save this moment, not for social media or attention, but because he knew he might want to hear it again someday. When he needed a quiet reminder that unexpected beauty could appear anywhere, still, the young man remained lost in the music. His face softened with each note, almost as if he were recalling memories from long ago. The piece he played wasn't complicated in a way meant to impress musicians. Instead, it was complicated in the way a person's emotions are, full of hidden corners, gentle turns, and sudden shifts that carried meaning. His right hand played a soft, lingering pattern while his left hand built a warm foundation beneath it. Together, the two created something that felt larger than the room itself. It was soft enough to keep the atmosphere gentle, yet strong enough to hold everyone's attention. A few Guests who had been standing near the refreshment table slowly walked closer, their drinks in hand, not wanting to miss what was unfolding. They didn't sit. They simply stood quietly, as though afraid their chairs might make noise and interrupt the performance. Even the air felt different. The usual sounds of an evening gathering, clinking dishes, shifting shoes, small laughs seemed to disappear completely. Leaving behind only the piano, the young man gently shifted into another section of the piece. The notes became slightly brighter, carrying a soft spark of energy that made a few people smile. It wasn't a dramatic change, but it was enough to make the music feel like a sunrise slowly pushing its way. Through a quiet morning, one of the older guests, who had once learned piano many years ago, watched closely. He recognized the difficulty behind the young man's gentle movements. The smooth transitions, the delicate timing, the emotional control, these were not things that came from casual practice. These were signs of someone who had spent years building a quiet relationship with music. He nodded to himself, deeply impressed. Meanwhile, the host stepped back slightly, giving the young man space, but also wanting to take in the reactions of the room. He noticed the silence, the stillness, the soft expressions. He knew then that this performance had given the gathering something rare, something genuine. The young man's fingers began to slow, not because he was tired, but because the piece was reaching a softer moment. The notes stretched out gently, like a calm breath being released. The sound washed over the room in soft waves, bringing a quiet sense of peace. People leaned into the music without even realizing they were doing it. The stillness of the room grew deeper, but not in a heavy way, more in a thoughtful way. The kind of silence that forms when people are truly connected to what they are hearing. The young man played. One more gentle rise in the melody, letting it linger in the air just long enough for people to feel it before allowing it to fall again in a quiet descent. His hands moved slowly now, the warmth that made the music feel like a soft embrace. He wasn't aware of the dozens of eyes watching him. He wasn't aware of the smiles forming across the room. He wasn't aware of the emotion quietly building in people's chests. He was simply lost in the beauty of the moment, guided by something far beyond technique. The notes continued to drift through the hall, creating an atmosphere that felt almost magical. People who had expected nothing more than a casual tune were now witnessing something heartfelt and deeply human. It didn't matter that the young man had no intention of performing. It didn't matter that the audience had not prepared for anything special. What mattered was the sincerity in the music, the quiet skill behind each movement, and the way it touched the room in a way no one had expected. And as the young man continued to play, everyone in the room felt, in their own quiet way, that they were witnessing something rare, something that would stay with them long after the last note faded. The music had already changed the room. But as the young man continued to play, something even more remarkable began to happen. His fingers moved with a sense of purpose that came not from wanting to impress the crowd, but from a place deep inside him. It was the kind of movement that only came when someone stopped thinking and simply allowed themselves to feel. He had no idea how many eyes were on him. If someone had told him earlier that he would become the center of the evening, he would have laughed softly and shaken his head. He had never seen himself as someone who could hold an audience. But now, without trying, he had captured every heart in the room. His hands traveled from one end of the keyboard to the other, sometimes with fast, graceful movements, and other times with slow, thoughtful touches. Each note seemed to draw a new breath from the room. People found themselves leaning in a little closer, as though the piano were telling them something important, something personal. The young man wasn't performing a piece he had rehearsed for moments like this. He was playing something he had carried inside him for years, something he never thought he would share. The melody felt like a memory he had never spoken aloud. It carried quiet feelings, soft sadness, gentle hope, and an unspoken longing that made the room feel warmer and more connected. One woman sitting near the front felt a shiver run across her arms as he reached a new part of the piece. She didn't know why it touched her so deeply, but she felt as though the music was reaching into a part of her that she had kept quiet for a long time. She clasped her hands together and breathed slowly, letting the sound settle into her heart. A group of teenagers who had been standing near the door earlier now sat on the floor, forming a small circle around the piano. Their usual chatter and laughter were replaced with quiet fascination. One of them whispered, "This is crazy good." But even he said it softly, as if speaking too loudly would break the moment. The host, still standing off to the side, felt a deep pride swell in his chest. He kept glancing around the room, amazed at the atmosphere that had formed. This wasn't just entertainment anymore. It was something meaningful, something powerful in a quiet way. He had seen many gatherings in that hall, but nothing had ever felt like this. The young man's playing changed again. The notes grew brighter, filling the room with a new energy. They danced lightly, but carried a strength that made people straighten up in their seats. His fingers moved quickly, almost like they were chasing something in emotion, a memory, something only he understood. As he played this section, the room felt as if it were traveling with him. The energy lifted people's spirits, making them feel alert and alive. A man standing near the back smiled unconsciously, the kind of smile that appeared when someone felt a sudden rush of warmth. He nudged the person next to him and whispered, "I didn't expect this at all." The melody shifted again, moving from the brighter notes back into something softer, more reflective. The transitions were so smooth that the audience barely noticed the change at first. But soon, they felt it the way the music reached for something deeper. The young man's shoulders softened even more. His breathing matched the rhythm of the keys. He wasn't simply playing music anymore. He was sharing a part of himself, piece by piece, note by note. A few people in the room felt their eyes grow warm, though none of them cried. It wasn't the kind of music that demanded tears. It was the kind that touched a person gently, reminding them of forgotten moments, quiet memories, small joys, and soft losses. The kitchen staff, who had peeked out earlier, stepped a little farther into the hall now. One of them wiped their hands on their apron and leaned forward with interest. The sound reached them clearly, even from the doorway. It made them pause their work without even realizing they had stopped. The young man played with a level of emotion that came naturally to him, even though he never expressed himself this way in front of others. Those who knew him only as the quiet guest at gatherings would have never guessed that he carried such depth. But now, it was clear, as the music flowed through the hall, every guest began to feel connected, not just to the music, but to one another. People who had come with heavy thoughts found those thoughts softening. People who felt tired earlier now felt strangely awake, and people who had arrived as strangers felt something shared, something unspoken that tied them together. The young man lifted his hands slightly between sections of the melody, letting a moment of silence slip into the room before continuing. Instead of feeling empty, that silence felt full of anticipation, full of warmth, full of emotion that couldn't be described. Then the music returned, richer this time. His hands flowed effortlessly across the keys, blending strength and softness in a way that seemed impossible to plan. He didn't think about what came next. He let his heart lead him, trusting the story within the notes. A young boy sitting cross-legged on the floor tilted his head as he watched. His eyes were wide in admiration, and he whispered, "It's like he's talking without talking." No one corrected him. They all felt the same. Another man, one who had played piano as a hobby years ago, watched closely. He recognized the difficulty behind the smoothness, the emotional control behind the softness, and the confidence behind the speed. He felt humbled. He had spent years practicing, yet he had never played with this kind of emotional honesty. The young man's tempo changed again, shifting into a gentle rhythm that made people sway slightly in their seats. It felt comforting, like the kind of music someone might play late at night when the world was quiet. It carried warmth, like a soft blanket wrapped around the room. As he continued, the young man felt something lift inside him. He realized without looking up that the room had grown completely silent. It was the kind of silence that musicians dream of, the kind that came from true attention, from hearts open and listening. His hands moved more confidently now. Each note seemed to settle perfectly into place, as though the piano knew exactly what he wanted from it. The sound grew deeper, more emotional, but never heavy.
Ow.
It was balanced, peaceful, full of quiet strength. People in the room held their breath during certain moments, not out of tension, but out of respect for the beauty unfolding before them. A child rested her chin on her knees, completely lost in the sound. A man placed a hand over his chest lightly, feeling the music echo inside him. The melody reached a point where the notes rose softly, creating a moment that felt like a sigh of relief. Then, almost without warning, the young man shifted into a section that carried a gentle ache. It wasn't sad, but it held something tender in emotion that felt familiar, yet hard to name. The room absorbed it completely. People felt it in different ways, but all of them felt something. That was the magic of the moment. The music didn't tell them what to feel, it simply opened a space where their own emotions could breathe. Then the music grew stronger again. The young man's hands moved with a renewed energy, almost as if they were racing towards something. The sound filled the hall with a quiet determination. It didn't feel aggressive. It felt brave, like a person finally finding the courage to speak up after staying silent for too long. The guests felt it too. Their hearts lifted as the notes rose with strength and confidence. It felt like triumph, like hope, like something inside them waking up. The young man played through this section with fire in his fingers, not loud, but deeply alive. His expression stayed calm, but his body felt the music fully, and the audience felt it through him. Then slowly, the energy began to soften. The young man allowed the melody to settle, bringing it down gently, like lowering a flame without putting it out. The notes softened, but their warmth remained. This transition felt like the peaceful moment after a storm, quiet breath, a calm realization. People relaxed into it, letting the music soothe the energy it had stirred. The last part of his playing in that moment was soft, gentle, and thoughtful. He touched the keys as though they were fragile and precious. The sound slowed but carried a warmth that surrounded everyone. The young man didn't know it yet, but this performance would stay with the people in the room long after the night ended. He had given them something Raran's honest moment, born from pure emotion, something they didn't expect but were grateful to experience. And as he continued to play, unaware of the awe around him, the room remained completely captivated, held. Together by the story he shared without ever saying a single word, the evening carried a calm feeling as the group settled back into their seats, still thinking about the unexpected moments that had unfolded earlier. Even though the room had returned to its quiet state, something in the atmosphere felt different, like a soft spark that had not yet faded. People who usually spoke loudly were now sitting with a strange stillness, and those who rarely paid attention to anything were now completely focused, as if waiting for something else to happen. No one said it out loud, but everyone felt it inside. The person at the center of everything stood near the piano, not sure whether to sit again or simply step away. It was supposed to be a simple evening, nothing more than casual music in the background. But somehow everything had started shifting without any intention. A small request earlier had changed the mood of the entire room, and now everyone seemed to be holding on to the memory of that moment, hoping for more but not wanting to appear demanding. It was a strange kind of quiet excitement. A few people exchanged glances, whispering to each other about how smooth the earlier performance had been. Some wondered how long the person had been practicing. Others tried to guess the level of training involved. But the one thing they all agreed on was how effortless it looked. Even though everyone knew playing the piano like that was far from easy, the notes had not only reached their ears, but stayed in their minds. Repeating softly like a tune they could not forget, the pianist looked around the room, noticing the expectant eyes. It made the moment even more intense. They had not come to show talent or prove anything. They had simply responded to a request made with a smile, a request that was not supposed to change the direction of the evening. Yet here everyone was, sitting quietly as though something big was about to happen again. The pianist lowered their eyes for a moment, feeling a mix of nerves and excitement. It was unusual. They had played many times before, but this was different. This crowd was not a crowd in the usual sense. These were familiar faces, people they interacted with casually in day-to-day life. Playing for strangers was easier sometimes because strangers came with no expectations. But playing for people who knew you, yet never expected this side of you, came with a new kind of pressure. Still, a soft voice inside whispered that this was a chance, not a burden. moment that did not need to be perfect. A moment that could simply be honest. A friend sitting nearby leaned forward and spoke gently, "Only if you feel comfortable. We're just enjoying it." The words came as a relief. They weren't pushing, they were inviting. The pianist took a small breath and sat down again. Bench creaked softly, and a few people straightened up in their chairs. Fingers hovered over the keys for a moment, adjusting to the familiar weight of them. Even though the lights were not bright, the polished surface of the instrument reflected enough warmth to encourage a sense of calm. This time, instead of starting with a rehearsed piece, the pianist decided to let their hands move naturally. No sheet music, no plan, just raw emotion shaped into sound. The first note came out quietly, almost hesitant, but it carried a gentle kind of beauty. More notes followed, each one growing slightly bolder, weaving a soft melody that filled the room. It wasn't like the performance earlier. That one had been smooth and clean, something practiced many times. This one was more vulnerable, revealing more than skill. It showed feelings that had not been spoken aloud, thoughts that never fit into sentences. It was the kind of music that told a story without using words. People felt it instantly. The room became so quiet that even the slight sound of someone shifting in their chair felt too loud. Some people closed their eyes to absorb the melody, while others leaned forward with their elbows on their knees, trying to catch every single note. The softness of the melody seemed to settle into the heart of everyone present. The pianists themselves was surprised by how easily everything flowed. Their hands moved as if guided by something beyond practice technique. It felt like they were releasing something they had held inside for a long time without even knowing it. Each chord carried a meaning that could not be explained, yet it made perfect sense to them. At one point, the melody climbed softly, rising like a quiet hope, then dropped gently, like a memory returning after being forgotten for years. The shifts were subtle, but the room felt each one of them. Even those who usually did not connect with music deeply felt something warm stirring inside. The pianist continued playing for several minutes, unaware of time passing. It was one of those rare moments where nothing else mattered. The mind stayed clear, the emotions stayed honest, and the music came out pure. When the piece finally came to a natural end, there was no dramatic finish, no loud final chord. It faded slowly, like a whisper that didn't need repeating. For a moment, no one moved. It wasn't because they didn't know whether to clap. It was because they didn't want to break the atmosphere that had wrapped around them. Eventually, someone took a soft breath, and then gentle applause followed. It wasn't loud or rushed. It was warm, real, appreciative, the kind of applause that told the pianists they had just shared something meaningful. The pianists looked down at their hands, slightly overwhelmed. They hadn't expected to feel such a strong connection with everyone there. It was strange to think how a simple request had opened the door to this moment. A man sitting near the back spoke with a warm grin. "You should play more often. We didn't know you had this inside you." Several heads nodded in agreement. The pianist laughed softly, almost shyly, and replied, "I didn't know either. Not like this." Someone else chimed in. It didn't feel like a performance. It felt like story. A real one. That comment landed deeply. That was exactly what the pianist had felt while playing, like speaking in a language that everyone understood even without knowing the words. A woman sitting near the front leaned back in her chair and said, "It's rare to hear something that feels so honest. Please don't hide this side of yourself." There was no pressure in her tone, just genuine encouragement. The pianist appreciated it more than they could express. They had always been unsure about sharing their music. It felt too personal, too fragile. But hearing the sincerity in people's voices made something inside them shift. Maybe sharing wasn't something to fear. Maybe it was something to embrace. The evening continued with gentle conversations. People talked about small things, but the mood remained calm and warm. The earlier music had left something soft in the air, something like a peaceful glow. Some people decided to leave after a while, thanking the pianist again on their way out. Others stayed a bit longer, talking and smiling, unwilling to let the evening end too soon. When the room finally grew quiet, the The pianist remained seated at the bench for a moment. Running their fingers lightly over the keys without pressing them down, they thought about everything that had happened, the simple request, the unexpected emotion, the surprising connection. It was clear now that this was not the end of the story. This was only the turning point, the moment that would lead to something even bigger. They did not know what was coming next, but they felt ready to face it. And for the first time in a long while, they felt excited about what their music could become. The room might have emptied, but the feeling remained. And tomorrow, everything would begin to change in ways none of them expected. The morning after the quiet gathering felt strangely calm, as if the air itself carried the memory of the music that had filled the room the night before. The pianist woke up with a gentle heaviness in the chest, not from stress or regret, but from an emotion they couldn't quite name. It was a mix of surprise, hope, and a little curiosity about what might happen next. The memory of everyone's warm reactions kept replaying in their mind. And even though they tried to shake it off, it stayed with them like a soft echo. The day moved slowly. Simple tasks like making breakfast or arranging the room seemed different. The pianist's thoughts drifted often, replaying the moment when their hands had moved freely across the keys without fear. They had never played like that in front of people before. It wasn't a rehearsed piece or a familiar tune. It was something raw and real, something honest. As the day went on, a few messages arrived from people who had been there the night before. They all said the same thing in different words, that the performance had touched them, that it felt genuine, that they hadn't expected something so emotional from someone they saw every day in such ordinary settings. The pianist read each message slowly, feeling a gentle warmth spread inside. They didn't respond right away. They wanted to take time to understand what they were feeling. There had always been music inside them, but something had held them back from sharing it openly. Maybe it was fear of judgment. Maybe it was the belief that people wouldn't understand. But last night had changed something. It had opened a door they didn't even know they were standing behind. Later that afternoon, they went for a walk to clear their mind. The streets were calm, the sky a soft pale blue with thin clouds drifting across it. The sound of distant traffic blended with the breeze, creating a quiet background hum. While walking, they realized something important. Music had always been their way of expressing what words failed to explain. And now that people had actually heard that side of them, it felt like a new chapter had begun. When they returned home, they found a gentle knock on their door. It was the same friend who had encouraged them the night before. The friend smiled shyly and stepped inside when invited. "I didn't want to bother you," the friend said softly, "but I've been thinking about last night. Just wanted to tell you again that it meant a lot. You played with so much feeling. It wasn't just music, it was something deeper." The pianist nodded, appreciating the sincerity. "I didn't expect it to come out like that. It felt like I was speaking without saying anything." "That's exactly it," the friend replied. "And people need that. They connect to real things, not perfect things." The friend paused for a moment, almost hesitant to continue. Then they said, some of us were talking. I think it would be amazing if you considered playing at the community event next month. It doesn't have to be anything big. Just one or two pieces. No pressure." The suggestion took the pianist by surprise. They hadn't imagined something like that. The idea of playing in front of more people felt overwhelming, but also strangely exciting. It wasn't about showing skill. It was about sharing something meaningful. "Let me think about it," the pianist said gently. Of course, the friend smiled. "Take all the time you need. Just want you to know you have something special." After the friend left, the pianist sat at the piano again, not to practice, but to simply place their hands on the keys. The cool surface of the ivory felt steady, like a familiar anchor. They pressed a few gentle notes, listening to the soft resonance fill the room. It reminded them how natural it felt to express emotions through sound instead of words. As evening came, they closed their eyes and began to play again. This time, the melody carried a new energy, one of growing courage. The notes rose and fell with emotion, carrying traces of the past night, but also something new, something hopeful. The music drifted through the room, wrapping around their heart like a quiet reminder that they were capable of more than they believed. For years, they had kept this part of themselves hidden, unsure of how people would react. But now, after that unexpected performance, they realized that sharing their music did not weaken them. It strengthened them. Over the next few days, the pianists noticed small changes around them. People smiled more warmly when they crossed paths. Some mentioned the music in passing, others simply nodded with admiration. It wasn't overwhelming or uncomfortable. It felt like gentle encouragement from the world around them. One evening, they decided to attend a casual community meetup. It wasn't anything formal, just a small group gathering to enjoy snacks and conversations. When the pianist walked in, a few people lit up with friendly smiles. Someone approached and said, "We were actually just talking about your piano piece. It stayed in our minds. It was beautiful." Another person added, "You have a gift. Don't stop sharing it." Hearing such words made the pianist's heart feel full, not heavy, not pressured, just full. Later in the evening, someone jokingly asked, "Are we getting another surprise performance tonight?" The room laughed lightly, not expecting anything serious. But the pianist surprised everyone, including themselves, by saying, "If there's a piano available, maybe I can play again." Just something simple. The room grew excited but remained respectful, giving the pianist space. Small. Upright piano stood in the corner of the room, slightly older, but still holding a gentle charm. When the pianist sat down, the room settled into a calm hush. The keys felt different from the piano at home, but the emotion was the same. And once again, they played not a practiced piece, but a melody formed from memory, feeling, and quiet courage. This time, the music held gratitude. Gratitude for the kindness of those around them. Gratitude for finding a way to express things too deep for words. Gratitude for discovering a new part of themselves. Every note carried a soft message, and the room absorbed it with silent appreciation. When the music drifted to its end, a warm wave of applause followed, not heavy or loud, but full of heart. People approached afterward, thanking the pianist not just for the performance, but for the feeling it brought into the room. Some said the music brought them peace. Others said it reminded them of old memories. And a few even said they hadn't felt that moved in a long time. The pianist walked home that night under the soft glow of the streetlights, feeling lighter than they had in years. The quiet walk gave them space to think about the unexpected journey that all started with one simple request. A request that had awakened a side of them they had pushed aside for too long. When they finally arrived home, they sat at the piano once more. They didn't play anything complicated, just a few gentle notes that filled the room with comfort. The decision formed naturally, clear and calm. They would play at the community event next month. Not to impress, not to prove anything, but to share. Share the same honesty that had touched the hearts of those around them. As they closed the piano lid for the night, they smiled softly. They knew their journey was just beginning. The music that had once been hidden was now stepping into the world, little by little, reaching people in unexpected ways, and all of it had started with that one small moment. When someone asked softly, "Can you play something?" A simple request that had opened a door to a future they had never imagined. A future shaped by music, a future shaped by courage, a future shaped by the quiet power of sharing what was once kept inside. And the pianist was finally ready to let it all unfold.